Sometimes when you have ADHD, there can be a kind of perfect storm between impulse control struggles and then difficulty of letting things go. Even if you don't have ADHD, maybe you relate to this. So in this video, I'm going to talk about a couple of systems or strategies that I've worked with and what they've taught me about acquiring things and letting things go, whether that's physical items in your home, whether that's buying a million courses, acquiring a million hobbies. I want to talk a little bit about what I've learned about putting limitations on things and some of the practices that I've kind of played with informally for giving myself a break from acquiring things, from exploring things, and what I've noticed about what that does with my brain and how I relate to that category of thing later. So whether that's tarot decks, books, what have you. We're gonna just have a little informal couch chat about this. So grab yourself a beverage, have a seat, and have a listen. If you're new here, hi, my name is Avery, and I help justice-aligned, neurodivergent, and nerdy humans to cultivate ease and self-trust for growing into our emerging future. And I'm here with my friend Hippo. That's his name. You have to say it like that. Hippo. The squishmallow. And I'm hanging out in my couch back in the Pacific Northwest. So if you have been following my videos, you may have noticed that I was in a different environment for a few months, but now I am back home. And we're trying out a little couch chat because you can kind of tell there's better lighting over here than there is at my desk. So when I don't need my screen, I'm gonna just see how this goes. All right, so let's get into it. I just noticed this topic that was coming up with some of my clients who are ADHD. I don't think it's just relevant to people with ADHD, though. I think it's honestly relevant to a lot of us. And it's really about this like intersection between availability and accessibility of a lot of stuff. So whether that's, courses, whether that's information, whether that's stuff, Hippo, I will never let you go, but whether that's physical items, whatever it is, there's an intersection between just all the options that are there, and the way that we're sold and marketed to, of course, is kind of underneath that. And then there's, impulse control, challenges with impulse control, the kind of dopamine hit you get when you find something new, just the excitement of like, ooh, shiny, that often is going to occur in folks, particularly with ADHD, particularly with either combined type or impulsive type ADHD, but others as well. And then there's this kind of like question of release or letting go or being able to, whether it's letting go of things that you've already acquired or like letting go of that need. And I think an intersection as well with the idea of kind of limitations or rules or guidelines or ways to rein yourself in. I think this can be a really sensitive topic because I don't want to shame anybody. I don't want to shame myself, right? I think sometimes, acquiring stuff, as much as I'm, kind of like this anti-capitalist person and critical of like consumer culture, I also don't think that you need to shame yourself for, getting things that bring you joy. Like if you have a large tarot deck collection, for example, the question is not how many decks you have. It's like, and it's not even, I think sometimes with tarot, people will talk about kind of like, well, are you using all of them? Like, I don't even know that that's the question. I think the question is just like, are you happy? Is this the right collection for you? It's so easy for us to shame. And in fact, like there's such a, at least there used to be, and I think still very much is, a lot of discussion about the kind of like shaming of especially folks who don't have a lot of income and like what we're buying and well, if you just restricted your buying you would be fine. It's like, no, just grow up. So that's my unfiltered feeling about that. That said, I think like for a lot of us it can be this kind of like difficulty with knowing what you want, whether you want things, kind of having struggles. And I think particularly if you have executive function challenges, it's very normal to see all the things that are coming in and have trouble kind of like prioritizing, categorizing, saying, yes, this is a thing I really want or need, this is not. There can be a feeling even of like, you know, FOMO, fear of missing out, or a feeling of like grief of letting things go. Like if, let's say, there's like a limited time class and you're like, I don't really have time to take this right now, but it's the only time it's being offered, you know, that kind of feeling can totally come up. And I was surprised when I started taking ADHD medication. You know, I didn't really think of myself as a like compulsive acquirer of things. And yet I did notice that there was like this really stark difference. And I had always thought of myself as being like primarily inattentive ADHD, and you know, I was diagnosed as combined type. I hadn't paid as much attention to the impulse stuff, but when I started taking ADHD meds, I was like, wow, this is fascinating. I can go to Kickstarter.com and type in tarot decks and not buy anything. I was like, it's interesting that I couldn't do that before. I've learned something about myself. I think for me, there was this, especially with physical things, right? There was this point at which I was able to financially buy frivolous things, and it was like this whole list kind of things that I would have when I had money was kind of like sitting in my head, and like the idea of being able to do, you know, fun purchases. I'm not a big shopper. I was never like somebody who like went to the mall and bought clothes or whatever. Maybe that's a gender norms thing, but like it was just not my thing. But getting into hobbies like tarot, getting into, you know, like I did bullet journaling for a while, so things like buying lots of stickers and lots of pens and lots of markers. Being able to just do that was kind of exciting. Not gonna lie, I was like a kid in the candy store, and it wasn't that I even felt like there wasn't really a point at which I felt unhealthy about it or how much I was buying, but I did kind of notice that it was very hard to rein that in if I wanted to. And then when I got to a point where my financial situation went back to being really tight, I was, you know, grateful for the ADHD medication. Did make it easier. But I noticed too that it was like a big shift to go from kind of buying 2 or 3 decks a month to buying no decks. And I learned some interesting things in that. So there's a couple of different systems or like practices that I want to kind of talk about how they've influenced me. But before I get into those, one kind of realization that I've had, or noticing that I've had around tarot decks specifically, is that I stopped consuming a lot of the content where I learn about new decks. So this actually started in my depth year, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But when I did a depth year, one of the things that I limited myself to was that I wasn't going to go to Kickstarter, Amazon, Etsy. I had like a list of sites that I just wasn't going to go to just to see what was available. So I wasn't going to like just check to see what prices were like or things were on sale right now. I would only go to those sites if I needed something very specific. And so that was one layer of it, and that was definitely like, oh, you know, if you're not seeing everything that's coming out, funny how that can be useful. I stopped going to I used to look at every post on Indie Deck Review on Instagram. And then a couple years later, so now this would be a couple years ago, I was having this feeling of wasn't even cluttered because I'm not that cluttered, but it was this feeling of I have too much stuff. I think it was, and it kind of grew, especially as I was having, you know, issues in my home with mold that we've thankfully taken care of. I think, knock on wood. But I was confronted again with this, there might be a time where you have to get rid of everything. There might be a time where you have to move again. What would that look like? And so there was that general feeling, and I really started looking at my tarot collection, and for the first time I was looking at my tarot collection feeling different about it, right? I went from feeling like, sure, I don't use everything a lot, but like, I love everything here. I'm not harming anything right now by having a big tarot collection. So one thing that I have a fairly expensive collection of, I'll just let that be my thing. And then it shifted to, it's feeling burdensome. It's feeling like there's so many decks. It's feeling frustrating because they don't all fit on the shelf. So they're like, do like this, and then I have to stack decks now. And I don't like that energetically. I always had this thing where I would not put decks on top of each other. It's funny because like I don't charge my decks under the moon. I don't follow any of those rules. But the one thing I heard once that stuck with me was the idea that if you have decks on top of each other, and I don't think this is a hard and fast rule, it's just, it energetically worked for me. If you have them on top of each other, it's like imagine, you know, you lived here on the couch and someone was always sitting on you. How would that feel? And I kind of anthropomorphized my decks a little. So I was like, oh, I don't want them on top of each other. So that's like a sign to me. It's like, okay, that's a pretty big shelf. And it's, you can't see it right now, but if you look at most of my videos, you'll see it behind me, big wire shelf. The fact that they don't all fit on that shelf is an interesting fact that I think I want to do something about. And I was, you know, I managed to identify some decks that I want to get rid of, but not enough to do much about that shelf problem. And then, I've just noticed that I got real behind on YouTube, so I wasn't watching like some awesome creators on here, by the way, like Lisa at Supportive Tarot does some really great deck review videos, Laura Aquamarine 18, Tarot and Books, I believe it's called now. You know, a friend of mine who does really good book and deck reviews, you know, various folks, Dom Michelle, that like, I still love these folks, I still love these videos, but I was just behind for a while, so I had them all sort of like piling up in a queue, and I had just been like struggling with my to-dos as well, so I wasn't like, normally I have a monthly like go through my deck wish list, wasn't doing that, so I wasn't thinking about decks at all, and it was like weirdly a relief that I didn't expect necessarily, but it was just like, oh, I don't have a feeling of need or a feeling of like lacking of like any of the decks on my giant wish list of decks to acquire. I'm not feeling the feeling that I've had for so many years of like, what if a deck like the Slow Hauler comes out? Because I've always had this thing with the Slow Hauler that is like very clearly my soul deck and I don't have it. And, you know, I've been through so many waves of like, maybe I'll get it, you know, like a possible lead and then I don't get it. And I'll be frank with you, I've not let that go entirely. Like, it's very difficult for me to let go of that feeling with the Slow Hauler, but like, that one experience led me for so long to be afraid of like, what if an amazing queer deck comes out and I just don't hear about it, and then I find out and I would be devastated. It's like, would I though? Because I got plenty on my shelf. I have some amazing decks. I have the Lubanko. I have the Many Queens. I have the Numinous. I have a lot of amazing queer decks, right? So the kind of pithy thing people often say about acquiring things and about releasing things is, you know, gratitude for what you have, noticing what you have. So that's definitely part of it. But also just, yeah, not having it in front of my face. Having left social media means that I'm not really seeing a lot of the stuff anymore. And it really is like a sense of relief. And I started today like going back and watching some of those videos I haven't watched. And I've noticed that I'm much more discerning. Like I see a deck and I like hear the old voice. I hear the voice in my head that goes, that could be a nice deck. And then my current voice is like, I mean, it's fine, but would I use it? You know? And that's the luxury, that's the privilege of having a large collection of something, I think, is you can get to a point where you're like, oh, I have things. Obviously, if you have 5 or 6 decks, it's not going to feel that way. Anyway, so that's like one thing that I found really helpful was just like spending some time not being connected to whatever it is that you might want. So it could be like a hobby community. It could be, you know, fashion blogs if it's clothes. It could be, I don't know, food blogs if it's like fancy cookware, but basically like not knowing what's out there, and then kind of noticing, oh, that's nice. The trick I mentioned to a client the other day, it's very simple but very effective, is, and I'm sure you've heard of this, but I find it really useful, is to keep a list, and to never buy things in the moment, to throw them on the list. And I will be the first person to say that, like, I don't find ADHD hacks always helpful. There's hundreds of things you can do for ADHD, and whether, may or may not work for you. So take it or leave it. But I have found that just having a general rule that whenever I see something new that exists, it goes on a list, and then I work from the list, not from like the immediate moment, is really helpful. For me, I have a few different lists. I do tarot decks as its own wish list, and then I do have like a courses wish list, because I find it useful with something like courses there's different information I want about each one. Is it all the time? Does it come out at certain times throughout the year? Is it a one-time thing and they might do it again? Like that kind of information. So I have a course list, and then I have a healers list. So like folks I want to work with, tarot readers, astrologers, coaches. And then I have a kind of catch-all shopping wish list that has things like, neat art I've seen, witchy products, whatever it is. And I have found that since I started doing that, and because it's like a double, it's like use the list and not spending a lot of time like sitting on websites adding things to the list, just because it does fill a dopamine urge to like add a bunch of shit to a list. But that has really helped, because if I then say, okay, once a quarter I go and I look at my shopping wish list and I'm like, is anything here really feel important? Usually the answer is no. And then what I can do is use that as a reference. So if I am feeling like, oh man, like what's a good example? Oh yeah, like I recently had to get rid of all my essential oils because I realized they were not safe to use because of how old they were. And so now I can be like, okay, did I have any essential oils I wanted to try? Cool, I can check those out now. So you can go back to your list once you actually know that you need something in that category, is one way to approach it. Now, a couple of systems or tools, specific ones that I wanted to just quickly give you my impression on, that I've used at least a year, and so I can give you kind of like a reverse, how it went impression. Those two things are the Konmari Method and Depthier. So Konmari Method, I was gonna do like a whole like Konmari Method, like third time reset or whatever, and I even taped I taped myself Konmariing so that I could do voiceover, and then I'm like, do I ever do video editing? Obviously not, so that's probably never gonna happen, so we're gonna just call that video dead. Look, speaking of releasing things, we're releasing the video. But I do want to say that I started using the Konmari Method, I think it was 2019, I'm pretty sure, and I've done a reset each year. 2020 kind of was like a weird year because I moved, and so I was basically functionally doing KonMari as I was packing. But I did the KonMari Method, full way through Marie Kondo's two books, following the procedure, as it were. It was really helpful for me. It's the whole spark joy thing, if you've heard that. It was especially helpful for me letting go of things that I realized were more about the image of myself as somebody who had those things than actually having the things. And I think I've talked about before, one of the things I really love from that method is, and that I think you can apply to anything we're talking about. So, not like classes you've bought, whatever, books you have on your computer, like digital stuff. I really like the idea of thanking the thing for whatever role it had in your life. For spiritual folks, probably a lot of folks watching my channel, there's a spiritual component to that, of that ritualizing that release, because part of this is like, it's trying to be more discerning about what you acquire, but it's also, what does that release look like? And so KonMari is a lot about that release, and I think ritualizing that and allowing the thing to have had whatever role it had in your life. So I think she gives an example like, you might have bought something because it gave you joy in the store, and you never wore it, and you keep holding on to it because maybe you'll wear it. And it's like, the role of that thing, it turns out, was not to wear in your life. It was for that day of joy. And sure, if you really wanted to go back, you would say, should I bought that? But you already did. It's already happened. That's the past. So like, let's just thank the thing for having brought you joy that day, and then release it and let it go somewhere else. So I really like that, thinking of it that way. You know, I was having a lot of grief actually about getting rid of essential oils, and I realized, and this is another part of the process for me of like that letting go and that thinking things and letting them move on, is like allowing myself grief that a thing wasn't what I thought it was going to be. So I think it can be really helpful. You know, I had bought all these like witchy sort of oils and bath stuffs, and I felt really good about it. There was like a few things that represented for me. One, it was having the income to do the kind of frivolous purchasing. Two, it was like I never like, I'd always wanted to engage with like herbalism and magic or like kitchen witchery, and I'd never done that. And I really liked the idea of like, let's try this new thing. I also really liked the idea of supporting small businesses, supporting apothecaries, being able to say, yes, I will buy this fairly expensive thing that's expensive because it's handcrafted and there's a reason for that. And I'm supporting a business, and that feels really good. So it felt really good when I bought the things. I pretty much used none of them ever because they just weren't in my... It doesn't occur to me to be like, oh, grab an essential oil. And so I had to have this grieving process when I was admitting that I needed to throw all this out. Because I was like, I would love to have all this right now. I wish I could afford it, you know? And I was like, do I though? Because I had it and I didn't use it. So I think there was this thing for me of like, when I don't have... It's like wanting what you can't have, you know? I know it would be probably not a great idea, not the best priority right now for me to spend my money on something like that. And so then it's like, oh, like I'm grieving being able to do that. I'm grieving the image of myself as someone who walks around using all sorts of witchy products. And that's not who I am. So I'm going to let those things go. So KonMari was, you know, helpful in that way. I've done an annual reset where I go around and I don't necessarily pull everything out, like especially things that are stored kind of in their category. I'll like bring the other stuff from that category over to them. But I do try annually to go through each category, you know, clothing, books, papers, kimono, I can't remember the other categories, and check for the joy sparking, see how things are doing. And what I've noticed over the 4 or so years that I've done it is that definitely being in that practice does help me at the acquiring stage of being more discerning and saying like, am I excited about this thing because I like looking at it? Like actually a good example of this would be, I realized that I don't have any room for more art on my walls really. Like I don't like a really cluttered wall with art. And I was like, oh, but there's so many art things I have bookmarked. And I was like, wait a minute, I can look at it on my computer and get joy from that. So that was a good example of just realizing like, oh, it doesn't have to be on my wall to bring me joy. I mean, obviously I want to support artists, but like, you know, or it could be like I could get the journal with that cover on it or something else, but like I don't necessarily need the hanging art version of things. So that, like, I definitely do think KonMari can be great if this is the kind of thing you struggle with. I think doing that reset is really useful. I just did it, you know, when I came back, all my stuff had to bin up and then like tried really hard to like clean in case there's any little particles of mold contaminated dust. And so in that process, I essentially finished this year's, in November, this year's reset. And I noticed that often what happens is that there's a category of things that like you're not quite ready to let go of, and then the next year you are. And so I'm gentle with myself about it. But yeah. So still recommend that system. And generally I apply it more or less the way she does it with some exceptions. The other system is a depth year. So I sort of mentioned a depth year. I did one in 2020. And I'm considering doing one for 2024. It was really funny. So if you haven't heard of a depth year, I'll explain it in a second. But it was really funny because a client of mine is going to do one in 24. And I was like, oh, that's so funny, because I was thinking of doing this too, and I actually did it a few years ago. And I was like, I don't really remember it very well, though, so let me just bring up the little worksheet I made for myself that was like, here's my rules for depth year. And it was so funny. It was like, oh, you sweet summer child. So depth year, if you're not familiar, and I cannot remember the creator's name, but Google depth year, you'll find it real quick. Everybody was really into this. I think it was 2019 and 2020 when everybody got really into this, and a bunch of people were doing a depth year. And the idea is basically going deep, not broad, and then it's specifically helpful for like focusing on things you already have. So the idea is, you've always wanted to learn German or something, and you have these books for German and you just never get around to it. Or, you bought these courses and you haven't done them. And for a lot of people, it's also a spending limitation thing. So it's, I don't want to acquire new things. I don't want to come up with new things I might do that I'm not really going to. I want to focus on what I already have. And a lot of people have, found that really meaningful, successful. I think most people don't meet 100% of their rules, and that's totally fine. I tried to do it in 2020, which maybe was not the best year to do it. So I give myself, some grace for that. And then I remember that after I did it, I really had a strong feeling of like, no, I actually want a breadth year. Like I intentionally want a year after that where I do explore new things, where I do go in different directions. It was the first year of my business, and I was like, no, like I want to like learn different things, like different schools of thought around astrology and tarot. I want to like, really like peruse different perspectives to be more well-rounded as a practitioner. But now I think I am circling back. My thing about depth year, so when I looked at it, I laughed because I helped the client in the way that I would recommend with a depth year is that you really think about what is it that you want your depth year to be focused around. Like, what are the intentions, and as few as possible, that you have for yourself. And they don't have to be really narrow, but and I don't necessarily like setting quantitative goals. It might be a more qualitative sort of intention, but things like, my goal, I mean, it might be something like, I've always wanted to learn German. Sure, that could be it. It could be like, German is going to be a big focus for me this year. Aber ich spreche Deutsch ist nicht mein goal. Son of a, can't remember the word for goal in German. Point is, I already speak German. That's not my goal. But speak. I mean, it's been a while, as you just saw, because I forgot the word for goal. But yeah, so that you might set like concrete goals like that. But I think also depth year can be good for things like, my intention is that I want to really like focus on spiritual practice, and I want to like have more of an embodied practice. And so like, however I get there, and I think this kind of thing can be really useful if you have ADHD, because it may be that goals like learn German, you immediately get bored by, and you don't want to do it. And then you're like, what's the point of the depth year? But having like a broader thing where it's something like, I want a more embodied practice. And then it's like, okay, great. You can meander, you can wander, you can like find different ways to embody practice. It might be, I want to learn more about astrology, but like there's so many ways you can go with that. I think that can be a good way to do it if you do have ADHD, to give yourself kind of, it's like you're giving yourself guardrails, but you're allowing yourself, the metaphor I used with this client was a river. So it's like, a river has banks so that the water doesn't just go willy-nilly. You're giving yourself banks, but the river is very flowy. The river is always moving. The river is making its way around rocks. That's great. It's just that you want to be like, okay, but the river stays in this basic trajectory. I think that can work. Identifying clearly what those things are. And sometimes it's like tweaking, asking yourself, okay, but why? But why? But why? To get into the deeper thing of it. So like, let's say it is that you want like a more embodied spiritual practice. It's like, okay, I mean, that's pretty, like that's pretty clear to me. I would say that's a pretty good one, but you could go deeper into it. You could ask yourself, okay, what am I looking for? Like when I say that, like, what is it really? Is it, that I really want to try like some specific practices? I want to have more tools in my toolkit. Is it, I want to have a deeper connection with divine? Like, you know, is it I want to have more relationship with my body? You know, kind of getting at like what's underneath. Having a really clear idea of the kinds of things like that you're going for both helps you, I think, in a depth year to know what your limitations are, like know what doesn't fall within that, and then also at the end to kind of evaluate. And even if it didn't look anything like what you had expected, it's like, did you get to that deeper goal? It also helps give you permission as you go through the year and your focus changes to be like, actually, this is still meeting the same thing, because that's probably what's going to happen. So identifying a short list. Now you're going to laugh when I tell you how it actually went, but this is what I would recommend, is identifying a fairly short list of these like real focuses, reasons for your depth year. Then I would turn to, okay, now what are my rules and limitations? So usually with a depth year, people are setting kind of, you know, I don't want to buy X. I don't want to, and often it's like whole categories of things. I think I actually have videos on my YouTube channel. You can go back if you want, look at my playlist. There's like a depth year playlist. You can see some updates throughout 2020 where I talked about how it was going, I'm pretty sure, with my different kinds of rules. But I would have different categories where I would just say, I'm not buying anything new in this category. You know, I'm not, like, you know, no new hobbies is a common one. And those would relate back to your big intentions. It might be there's also, it's not just your big intentions that you do during the year, it might be other things. But I think having those to focus on, and then you can say things like, I'm not going to get any new courses unless the courses are directly related to one of those intentions. Or you might say no new courses because I already have. So this is a point where you can kind of think about, what do I already have? What have I already bought? What do I already have in my house or on my computer? And you can ask yourself. And so it might be that you actually list for yourself specific things. You know, I want a more embodied spiritual practice. Ooh, I have this journal that I've been meaning to work with. I have this practice that, you know, this class I bought, or this practice that I've written down that I've never tried. You know, you could list like some possibilities that you might end up exploring from what you already have. Or if you just don't have anything related to that, then that's okay. You can say, I would, you know, I can acquire things, but like I want them to be in this kind of category. I found that being really specific about things like no buy rules, I wouldn't say something like, I'm gonna not buy too many of this. Like, be really specific. So some people I've heard will do things like, I'm only gonna buy one tarot deck a month, no more than that on average. For me, it was more like, I'm not gonna buy any tarot decks unless they meet these criteria. They're, you know, something that my spidey sense says is gonna go out of print and be really hard to buy, and it's like this level of awesome, which I described for myself in a way I could understand. I did things like, I'm not gonna buy any tarot bags unless I have a deck that specifically needs a bag at this moment. So it was like, no like future buying, but buying for things that were specific. I think I said I could buy 2 courses that I didn't already have, but mostly I wanted to focus on what I had. So just like giving yourself some rules, giving yourself some limitations, and then having this stuff in a place you can see it so that you're actually focusing on it during the year is like pretty important. But if you are, I think it can work well. What I found with mine, that limitations list worked really well. So like I mentioned, like not looking at certain sites, that was great. Like not having those limits. And I've worked with a few people setting limits like this, setting boundaries for a period of time, and it can be so helpful. I think it is really Saturnian of being like, for this period of time, you know, I'm not gonna like sign up for any new classes. That can be such a relief for your brain, because you just know that when marketing comes up, you just ignore it, right? There might be a little bit of sadness, a little bit of, oh man, I wish I wasn't doing this right now, but it's fine. I did find that for me, I wasn't even going to those sites and putting things on a list. You could, in theory, put things on a list for later, but I think that like the psychic relief really came from not even engaging with it. So that was great. Limitations, awesome. I like limitations. I laughed my ass off though. I had 2 lists. I had focus and avoid. And I kind of vaguely remembered this. I remembered that when other people were talking about depth year, they had kind of specific intentions. And for me, it was really just like, I didn't have really like narrowing, focusing intentions. It was more just like, oh my God, I have so much shit that I haven't done, that I've bought, that I have sitting around. My focus list had like 40 items on it. But now that I look at it, I go, what the hell? Like, my list of focuses, there was no like big theme. It was things like, do these 6 big courses that you've bought, right? Study these 5 decks. I think I wanted to write 3 books. In what world was I going to write 3 books? Especially when it turned out there was a global pandemic that year. Did not write 3 books, let me tell you. Spoiler alert. I had all sorts of like random, and what it was is I think I was taking like the random little things that I had wanted to do for so long. It was also like I went to basically all my queues. So it was like, watch everything in my Netflix queue, read everything in my comics queue. That's a lot of stuff. I didn't actually try to do those things, which is probably good. I think in retrospect, like, it's always good to ask yourself, if you're doing the whole, like, I want to do things I've already bought, purchased, added to a list, especially if it's, like, added to a list and you didn't spend any money on it. I think I would ask myself, like, is that list actually useful? Is that list correct? Do I really want to watch what's on my list? You know, it might be a good time to cull cues and lists like that at the beginning of a depth year, you know, as a kind of, like, practice for entering the new year. And, yeah, of those things, that long list, I had checked off 4. So I managed 4. So one was hilariously write fan fiction. That was not a problem. I can't remember the 4th, but write fan fiction, it was, Spanish. It was Spanish study. So I actually did do Spanish study and piano. Play the piano, focus on the piano. Towards the end of 2020, it was really nice, like being locked down and everything. It was really nice, you know, being in a new city but not getting to engage in any way, shape, or form with other human beings. Having those 2 things that I had wanted to do for a long time. Finding ways to focus on Spanish and finding ways to focus on piano. And I kind of missed those 2 things. I'm like, damn, I haven't done those really since 2020. So even though I had the giant list, I still would call my depth year a success. I think, you know, those focuses were not bad, but I do think that the idea that you're going to just do everything that's on your list, it's like, ask yourself whether your list is correct. So as I go into 2024, I'm kind of thinking, like, what is it that that feels sparkly to me, that feels like I need it? And, you know, giving myself those, like, lane lines to swim within, but not trying to steer the boat too much within those lines is kind of what I'm going for. So if I do decide to do this, I'll do like a 2024 depth year video, but this is just a casual, clearly rambly chat. And I think I pretty much said what I wanted to say about this stuff. So the summary, such as it is, recap. First of all, there's like the point of acquisition. So there's asking yourself, getting to know, getting to discern, like, and not shaming yourself about it. And, you know, not like, the answer could be, actually, I'm in a place right now where I just want to buy shit and that's okay. But if you're feeling like it's a problem for you, or just a thing that you wish like you were doing less impulsively, being aware of what's underneath of how that's happening, is a big part of it. It's not just about tools, but also I think the tool of adding things to a list is a useful one. I think the Konmari tool of like thinking about what role that thing has for you, and is it I want to buy it, or is it just like I'm enjoying knowing that it exists, is another thing. So that's like point of acquisition. A depth year, if it feels like it's the right time, can be a helpful thing for this, putting in like limitations, focuses, so that you can just easily, quickly ask. An ADHD brain loves, like, give me a nice limitation, like, it doesn't fall in this category, then I just ignore it. That can be really helpful. Not looking at the websites can be really helpful. So that's point of acquisition, and impulsiveness. And then I think there's this, release process again, like it's spiritual. It's like ritualizing, grieving, allowing yourself to be sad about the fact that you have a thing that you didn't use, or you have a thing that you did use, and whatever it is. But Konmari, I do think, is a really useful, there are others, but like a really useful way if you're just looking for some help around, especially releasing things from your physical space, but you can also use it for digital things, whatever you need. You could like spiritually Konmari. There's all kinds of things you could Konmari. So that is probably my favorite way to work with the like releasing process. And then was there one other thing that I said at the beginning? I can't remember. There was impulsiveness. there was releasing and letting go. Oh, and it was boundaries. And so yeah, like the limitations of boundaries. That's where I think the depth year really like came in for me. And not every year is going to be a depth year. But even if you're not doing depth year, I think you can use similar limitations to guide yourself. Even if your goal is like, I actually want to do breadth, then maybe it's that the limitations are different. The limitations are more like, I don't buy more than one thing in the same category, or I don't do more than one class in the same category or from the same teacher, because I'm trying to go broader this year. So there are different ways you could approach that. So this has been a sort of rambly video, but if any of these topics specifically in this video you would like me to go deeper on, you'd like me to do, a little short video on, talk about systems. If there's like a challenge in this area that you're like, what is the tool or system that would address this? I know a lot of tools and systems around this kind of thing, so I'm happy to chat about them. And I'd love to hear in the comments if you made it this far. Yay! Give me an emoji, a star. If you made it to this point, give me a star emoji, and I'll applaud you. No, I'm kidding. You don't. Nobody needs to stick around. But yeah, let me know. What your relationship with this kind of thing is, and where you find challenges. And if you're not already, subscribe to the newsletter. Link is below, and you can find out about. I have all sorts of things, resources that come out. I have. Blog posts as well as videos on this channel, and so that's how you know everything in one place if it's coming out. Is just check out the newsletter below. I even have a new pay what you can $5 suggested price cool neurodivergent tool that I just released to my subscribers, so I'll be talking more about that on the newsletter, so you can check it out. And otherwise, we'll see you in the next video.